Alright, so now that we know which hands are good to 3-bet, the next question, and perhaps the most important one, is who are the players we should be looking to 3-bet the most? Well, let's start off by identifying the two key factors to look for against our opponents, and then I'll spend some time talking about each one individually to make sure you understand why it's important. The first one is their PFR, or their pre-flop raise percentage, and then the second one has to do with how they respond to c-bets in 3-bet pots. The best adjustment to make would be to start widening your value 3-betting range, right? On the other hand, if an opponent is again opening 25% of hands, but folding to 85% of your 3-bets, that means you should simply widen your bluff 3-betting range. You follow me? See, in PLO, since the equities are much closer together, and because players don't fold to 3-bets very much, bluff 3-betting ranges don't exist. And what all of this means is that similar to no limit, the players you want to target the most with your 3-bets are the aggressive openers. Now, something I'd like to point out is that the term aggressive opener can be used fairly subjectively depending on the context of the situation. But for now, just realize that the three categories of hands for 3-betting that I mentioned in the previous slides are designed to work against the standard opening ranges of opponents with PFRs ranging from 15 to 25%. We'll talk about this in more detail a few slides from now. But just realize that the tighter someone's opening ranges, the less likely you should be to 3-bet them with the type of hands I mentioned in the widening group. And something that's important to mention before we move on to the next slide is how important it is to always be looking for excuses to play heads-up pots with the weaker players. Remember that the vast majority of your profit is going to come from playing pots with the fish. For example, if you find yourself on the fence about whether or not you want to 3-bet in a given hand, if you see that they're a weaker player, then you should probably lean towards 3-betting it. For example, let's look at two different scenarios. In the first hand, you're faced with an open in position against someone playing a 30-20. And in the second scenario, you're faced with an open against someone playing a 60-20. Well, I'm a lot more likely to 3-bet the 60-20 player, simply because even though they share the same PFR, the 60-20 player is much more likely to be a weaker opponent, which means he's more likely to play poorly post-flop and make mistakes that I can capitalize on that the 30-20 player won't. Does that make sense? Okay, let's move on. Okay, the second key factor when choosing a 3-betting range is how your opponents respond to c-bets in 3-bet pots. See, there's basically two big mistakes that you want to exploit in regards to how players respond to your c-bets in 3-bet pots. The first are the players who play fit or fold in 3-bet pots, and the ideal situation for us occurs when we have a player on our right who opens too much but plays fit or fold post-flop. Against players like this, you can 3-bet any hand that falls into one of the three categories we mentioned earlier, because their actions in 3-bet pots make it very easy for us to hand read. They simply check fold when they miss, check raise when they flop strong, or check call when they have a medium strength hand. Easy game, right? Now, we've touched on this in previous lessons, but it's important enough that I want to bring it up again. Remember that the fastest way to lose money in poker is to build up big pots, only to give up on them later. We're going to talk about which hands to call 3-bets with in the upcoming slides. But for now, I just want to point out that you don't want to be like the fishy guys we're talking smack about here, because calling 3-bets and check folding flops is one of the easiest ways to bleed money in PLO. Anyways, the second leak to look for are the players who stack off too light in 3-bet pots. Adjusting against players like this is easy. Simply stick to 3-betting the premiums and playability group, and watch the stacks migrate into your corner. More often than not, these are the maniacs at the table who open anything that's reasonably connected and suited, and then can't help but go broke when they flop a pair and a gutter against your pair and a flush draw. Simply put, the key is to dominate their stack off range post-flop, which you can do by 3-betting the hands we discussed earlier. Okay, so knowing who to 3-bet and with what hands is easy enough, right? But just to make sure we have all of our bases covered, let's talk about the players we shouldn't widen our 3-betting range against. The first and most obvious player type are the nitty openers, which makes sense because they're the opposite of the player type we want to 3-bet the most, the aggressive openers. Now, we've talked a lot about how the key to winning stacks in 3-bet pots is to dominate our opponent's combo draws post-flop, right? Well, 3-betting tight openers light is an easy way to accomplish the reverse of this, and many times if you decide to 3-bet a hand without checking your HUD or identifying the player type first, you'll end up 3-betting a hand that has reverse implied odds post-flop. For example, according to Tom Chambers' book Advanced PLO Theory, if you're holding 8-6-5-3 double suited and you're facing an opponent with a 12% PFR, one of your suits will be crushed over half the time, and you'll have both of your suits dominated 10% of the time. This all sounds pretty ominous, but it's not as scary as it sounds. For now, you can save yourself some money in the future by simply remembering not to 3-bet nits with a wide range. You got that? Now, most of the tight opening ranges you'll encounter will come from under the gun opens, but something I'd like to point out is that even though HUDs are an extremely useful tool, they can definitely be misleading if you don't know how to use them correctly, which ultimately can cause you to make mistakes. For example, most players that see someone playing at 25-20 tend to forget that the given PFR in a HUD is an average of their opening range at the table, not for the specific position they're opening from. What this means is that someone who's playing at 25-20 is likely opening under the gun with a range that's much closer to 10% instead of 20. So before you 3-bet someone, make sure you take into consideration their opening range from every given position. Some players aren't positionally aware, but especially as you move up in stakes, the majority of players' ranges change a lot depending on where they're opening from, so it's important that you adjust accordingly. Also, this concept applies to situations where you can 3-bet people wider as well, because as players get closer to the button, their opening ranges generally widen as well. So, using the same example from a second ago, the player with an average PFR of 20% may open only 10% of hands from under the gun, but it's likely that he opens 40% of hands from the cutoff and button or more, which means that you should definitely 3-bet him lighter if that's the case. Does that make sense? Alright, let's move on.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Casino Crime here. Now, if you like this video and you want more, then go ahead and click the subscribe button below right now. And if you want to join me for more of my 6 max success secrets and free video tutorials, just click the link to the right. See you inside the trainings. Good luck.